my family, I was the one who paid for everything and got thanked for nothing. That's not self-pity, that's just the math of it. My younger brother's college tuition. I covered 2 semesters when my parents came up short. My mom's dental surgery 3 years ago. I wrote the check. The down payment on my parents' new car, that was me too. I told myself each time that it was fine, that this was what you did for family. That love showed up in practical ways. I was 31 years old and working as a hospital administrator in Cincinnati. I made decent money. Not spectacular, but decent. Enough that I'd spent the better part of 6 years being careful, eating lunch at my desk, driving a 2017 Honda with a cracked dashboard, skipping vacations. I had a plan. A condo I was finally close to affording. A real savings account, a future that felt, for the first time, like mine. And then my brother announced he was getting married. His fiancée's name was Serena. She came from a family that did things a certain way, meaning expensively. Her mother had opinions about centerpieces. Her father wore cufflinks to a casual dinner. They were the kind of people who talked about the right caterer like it was a matter of moral character. My brother Danny had been with her for 2 years, and I liked her well enough. She was sharp and a little guarded, but she laughed at his jokes, which I'd always thought required a specific kind of patience. They seemed genuinely happy together, and that part I didn't question. What I questioned was the venue deposit they couldn't cover. It started small, the way these things always do. My mom called on a Tuesday night in March, not a Sunday, not a birthday, not any occasion that would explain why she was being careful with her words. Serena's family has this vision, she said. It's a beautiful venue, honey, out by the lake. You should see the photos. I waited. The deposit is $45,000. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because I needed a second. Mom, just the deposit, she said. The total is closer to 90. I asked why they were calling me. She explained, or tried to. Serena's parents were covering their half. My parents didn't have their half. Danny didn't have savings. My mom said the words family investment and you've always been so responsible in the same breath, and I knew before she finished the sentence what was being asked. I should have said no. I know that now. I knew it then, too. In some part of myself I'd gotten very skilled at ignoring, but my brother was sitting there. I could hear him in the background, quiet, and I thought about all the years he'd looked up to me, all the years I'd wanted to be the kind of sister he could count on. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it for 4 days. I made spreadsheets. I looked at my savings. I looked at the condo listings I've been bookmarking for 2 years. I called my best friend Margot, who said, with the particular directness that had kept our friendship intact for 15 years, "You already know what I'm going to tell you." She was right. I knew. I said yes anyway. $45,000? My half of the venue, that was the agreement. I was covering my family's portion, and Serena's parents were covering theirs. I told myself it was a loan, though there was nothing in writing and we all knew what it really was. Over the following months, the requests kept coming in smaller amounts that felt easier to say yes to. The florist deposit. The rehearsal dinner venue, just a contribution, my mom said. The photographer, because the one Serena wanted was out of their budget. By October, I put in just under $80,000. $80,000 toward a wedding I hadn't been asked to be a part of. I wasn't in the bridal party. That was Serena's call, which was fair. I understood she had her own friends, her own circle. But I'd assumed I'd at least be seated with family, given some small acknowledgement of what I was doing. Instead, I got a +1 invitation and a table number that put me next to my dad's co-workers. I told myself it was fine. And then, 6 weeks before the wedding, my mom called again. This time her voice had a different quality, careful, like she was walking across ice. "I need to talk to you about something," she said, "and I need you to hear me out before you react." I set down my coffee. She told me that Serena's mother had raised a concern. The photos from Danny and Serena's engagement party had been shared in some group chat. I didn't even know there was a group chat. And apparently some of Serena's extended family had noticed I looked tired. That was the word she used, tired. And Serena's mother felt that having a visibly tired-looking person in the family photos might give the wrong impression, given that Serena's uncle was a prominent cardiologist and the wedding was going to be photographed for a regional lifestyle magazine. I waited for my mother to tell me this was ridiculous. She didn't. Serena's family is very image conscious, my mom said. And honestly, honey, you have been looking a little run down lately. You work too hard. Maybe it's better if you come to the reception but skip the ceremony. Less formal. Less visible, I said. That's not what Mom. I kept my voice level. I have put $80,000 into this wedding. You want me to skip the ceremony because I look tired? There was a pause. We just don't want any tension. I hung up. For about 4 hours, I was done. I was going to call the venue, call the caterer, cancel every payment I could still cancel, and let the whole thing fall apart. I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage and stared at the concrete wall in front of me and thought very clearly, I am done. But then I thought about Danny. He hadn't called, he hadn't texted, but I knew he knew about the conversation, and I thought, maybe wrongly, maybe stupidly, that he was embarrassed, that he was caught between his fiance's family and his sister and didn't know how to navigate it. I thought about the version of him at 15, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, with the lamp tilted wrong, too stubborn to ask for help until I came and fixed it without being asked. I didn't cancel anything, but I didn't RSVP either. 2 weeks later, my mom called again, this time to tell me gently that given everything going on with me, a phrase she used with particular care, they'd decided it would be best if I didn't attend at all. She said they'd told a few people I'd been dealing with some health stuff. What health stuff? I asked. Nothing specific, she said quickly. Just, you've been under a lot of stress, people understand. I found out later, from my cousin Teresa, who called me with the kind of apologetic energy that means someone feels guilty for knowing something, that my parents had told the wedding guests I was in a treatment program. Not dealing with stress, a treatment program. They had told Danny's future in-laws, Serena's relatives, their own friends, people I'd known since childhood, that I was in rehabilitation for substance abuse. I sat with that for a long time. Here's the thing about being told a lie like that. Your first instinct is to correct it, loudly, immediately, to anyone who will listen. Your second instinct is to wonder if correcting it will only make things worse, only make you look more like the unstable person they've described. Your third instinct, if you've spent your whole life being the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who keeps the peace, is to do nothing. I am a hospital administrator. I manage staff, patient relations, compliance, and departmental budgets. My professional reputation is not a minor concern. The idea that someone in my field could hear that story, substance abuse treatment, missed obligations, erratic behavior, and not have it color how they saw me was not something I was willing to accept. I called a lawyer friend from college, not to file anything, just to understand what I was dealing with. She used the word defamation without hesitation. She also told me that proving damages from family gossip was complicated, but that I had options and I should document everything. I started documenting. I didn't call my parents back. I didn't call Danny. I let the silence sit because I needed to think clearly. And I couldn't do that while being managed. The wedding was a Saturday in November. I knew the venue, I'd signed the contract. I knew the timeline. I'd seen the itinerary when my mom had emailed it to me back in September, before things went sideways. I knew the catering team's schedule because I'd been the one to coordinate the tasting back in July. I went, not to cause a scene. I want to be honest about that. I went because I needed to see it, to stand in a room full of people who'd been told a lie about me and know what I was actually dealing with. I went because $80,000 of my savings were decorating that room, and I deserved to at least see what it looked like. I wore a deep green dress I'd bought 2 years earlier for a work gala and never found another occasion for. I drove myself. I parked 3 blocks away and walked in through the side entrance near the catering staging area, where I knew the staff would be moving in and out and no one would question a well-dressed woman walking with purpose. The venue was genuinely beautiful. I'll give them that. The lighting was warm and low, the flowers were cream and burgundy, and the lake was visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, dark and still in the November evening. It looked exactly like the pictures my mom had sent me in March, when this had all seemed like it might just be a hard but manageable thing. I found a position near the back of the room, beside one of the tall wooden columns, where I could see the family tables without being immediately visible from the entrance. The ceremony was wrapping up in the adjoining room. I could hear the string quartet. I watched the doors open. The guests filtered in. Serena's family first, then my parents. Then Danny and Serena, radiant and overwhelmed in the way of people who've been looking forward to a single day for over a year. My brother looked happy, genuinely happy. It hit me somewhere specific, that observation, somewhere I hadn't prepared for. My parents moved through the room greeting people, and I watched my father stop at a cluster of Serena's relatives, her uncle the cardiologist, a few cousins, an older couple I didn't recognize. I watched him talk. I watched him gesture. I couldn't hear him from where I was standing. But Teresa could. Teresa was standing 6 feet away from that cluster, and later she would tell me exactly what my father said. That it had been a hard year for our family. That I was getting the help I needed. That they were grateful for everyone's privacy and discretion. I didn't know that yet. What I knew, standing beside that column, was that my father was telling some version of a story that did not include me putting $80,000 into the room we were all standing in. I stayed where I was. Dinner service started. I found a seat at a table near the perimeter, one of the auxiliary tables set for overflow guests, which happened to be mostly empty. And I sat quietly and ate the salmon I had paid for. The speeches happened. Danny's best man was funny. Serena cried during her vows reading. My parents sat at the head family table and smiled for photographs. I watched. And then maybe an hour into the reception, I saw the venue manager, a composed woman in her 40s named Rachel, who had emailed me approximately 40 times over the past 8 months, move through the room with the particular posture of someone carrying bad news. She was heading toward my father. I watched her lean in. I watched my father's expression change. I stood up. By the time I crossed the room, there was a small cluster forming. My father, my mother, Rachel, and one of Serena's parents. Rachel was speaking in a low, professional tone. I arrived close enough to hear her say, with genuine regret, that the final payment for the venue and catering balance, which had been scheduled to process that morning, had come back declined. My father said something about a banking error. Rachel said patiently that she'd attempted the backup card on file as well. My father looked at my mother. My mother looked at my father. "We may need to reach out too," my father started. "To me?" I said. Everyone turned. I don't know what I looked like in that moment. I know what I felt, which was very calm. Calmer than I'd expected. Calmer than I had any right to be, given the circumstances. Something about actually being in the room, actually standing there, had settled something in me. "I'm the one who set up the payment accounts," I said, looking at Rachel. "I'm the one whose card is on file. I removed my information this morning." Rachel looked at me. There was a flicker of recognition. We'd spent 8 months emailing, and then she said carefully, "I see." "I understand there may be a balance issue," I said. I kept my voice low. This was not a scene I wanted to make. "I'd like to resolve this. Can we step somewhere quiet?" We stepped to a small room off the main hall. Rachel, both of my parents, and myself. Serena's father followed, which I hadn't anticipated but didn't object to. In that room, I laid it out. Calmly, with the documentation I had. The bank transfers. The signed venue contract, my signature, my bank account, my money. The email chains, the payment confirmations. $80,000, itemized. My father said I was being dramatic. My mother said this wasn't the place. Serena's father said nothing. He was reading the documents on my phone with the focused attention of someone who does not like surprises. "I was told I couldn't attend the wedding," I said, still calm. "I was told by my own parents that I was not welcome because of how I looked, and then I was told by my cousin, not by anyone in this room, that my family had informed the guests I was in a treatment program." Serena's father looked up from my phone. "I'm a hospital administrator," I said. "That story affects my professional life. It affects my reputation in a community where I work. I have spoken to an attorney about it." I let that sit for a moment. What I have not done yet is decide what to do. I came tonight because I wanted to see this for myself, and I need to know, right now, in this room, whether this family is going to acknowledge what happened, or whether I'm going to leave here and let Rachel determine how to handle the balance on her own. The room was quiet. My mother started to cry, the kind of crying that in our family had always been the signal to stop pushing. I recognized it. I chose not to respond to it the way I usually would. My father said, "You really going to do this at your brother's wedding?" "You really told 300 people I was in rehab," I said, "at my brother's wedding." Serena's father set my phone down on the table between us. He looked at my parents and he said, "And I will remember this for a long time. This needs to be made right, tonight." There's a version of this story where what followed was dramatic and cinematic. It wasn't. What actually happened was quieter and more exhausting. My parents, in that small room, with Serena's father as witness, acknowledged that they had misrepresented my situation to the guests. They did not call it a lie. They called it the easiest explanation. My father said they hadn't meant for it to go as far as it did. Rachel arranged for the final payment to be restructured. I agreed to extend the original payment terms through a formal written acknowledgement, which meant the wedding continued and no one outside that room knew what had happened. Danny and Serena had their reception. The dancing happened. The cake was cut. From the main hall, everything looked exactly as planned. I sat at that perimeter table and finished my coffee. Before I left, Danny found me. He didn't say much. He sat down across from me and looked at the table for a moment, and then he said, "I didn't know about the rehab thing until tonight." I believed him. I also believe he'd known enough of the rest to have said something and hadn't. I told him that. Not cruelly, just honestly. He said, "I'm sorry, Mel." I nodded. I didn't tell him it was okay because it wasn't, but I didn't want to take his wedding from him any more than it had already been complicated by our family's choices. I squeezed his shoulder and told him Serena seemed wonderful, and I meant it. I drove home to my apartment that night and sat in my kitchen for a long time without turning on a light. In the months that followed, I had one more formal conversation with my parents, documented with Margot on a three-way call as a witness, in which they agreed to correct the record with anyone they'd spoken to. Whether they did or not, I can't verify fully. What I can tell you is that Teresa called me 2 weeks later to say my mother had told her there'd been a misunderstanding about my health situation. I'll take it. I also took the money conversation seriously. My attorney sent a formal letter laying out the contributions I'd made and requesting a repayment plan. My parents agreed to a modest monthly amount that will take years to complete and may never actually fully happen. I'm realistic about that. What the letter accomplished was something the money itself couldn't. It put the truth in writing, in a format that couldn't be reframed as a gift or a gesture, or a daughter who'd always been difficult. I never got a direct apology. Not the kind I'd have wanted, anyway. Not a clear, unqualified acknowledgement of what they'd done. I've made a kind of peace with that. Slowly, the way you make peace with things that aren't going to change. What I did get was the condo. Closing was in February. It's a 2-bedroom in a neighborhood I've loved for years. 3rd floor corner unit, morning light that comes in sideways across the kitchen counter. I went to the closing alone, signed my name on about 40 documents, and then walked out to my car and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes before I drove away. I thought about all the times I'd done something for my family, and told myself it wasn't a sacrifice, that choosing them wasn't costing me anything, that the version of myself who wanted things just for herself was something I could keep putting off. I don't put it off anymore. My brother texted me on closing day. Somehow he knew, maybe from my mom, maybe just because he pays attention more than he lets on. The text said, "Congratulations, you deserved this one." I stared at it for a while. Then I texted back, "Yeah, I did." I keep coming back to the moment I sat in my kitchen that night with the lights off. Not because it was dramatic. It wasn't, but because of how quiet it was. After months of noise, of managing and calculating and swallowing things down, the quiet felt like something I'd earned. Here's what I've come to understand about what happened with my family. The shape of it was never really about money. The money was just the clearest way to see something that had always been there. When you spend years making yourself useful, quietly, without complaint, some people don't see generosity. They see a system that works for them. They keep pulling from it because no one has ever made pulling from it feel costly. That's not a judgment, it's just what happens when someone never learns that the people who give the most can also choose to stop. What I had to figure out, slowly and not gracefully, was that being good at taking care of others is not the same thing as being wise about it. I'd always thought of myself as the responsible one, the steady one, the one who held things together. And I was those things. But responsibility without discernment isn't a virtue, it's a habit. And habits can be changed. The part that took me longest to accept was that I had made choices. All of it. The 45,000, the florist deposit, the photographer, the final 80,000 sitting in a beautifully decorated room I hadn't been invited to. I had said yes to all of it, not because I was weak, because I wanted to believe a certain story about my family, and I kept paying to keep that story intact. At some point, I had to be honest enough with myself to admit that the story was mine to let go of, not theirs to correct. What kept me standing in that room, calm, documented, clear, wasn't anger. Anger would have made me loud and easy to dismiss. What kept me steady was having done the work beforehand, knowing what I'd spent, knowing what had been said about me, knowing what my options were. I had talked to a lawyer. I had written things down. I had thought through what I actually wanted from that conversation, which wasn't revenge, it was acknowledgement. That distinction mattered. Danny said sorry to me with 2 words and a look that said he understood more than he was willing to put into language. I accepted that. Not because it was enough, but because I'd decided what enough meant for me, and it wasn't a perfect apology from someone who was also figuring things out. Enough was the letter my attorney sent. Enough was signing my name on the closing documents in February. Enough was the morning light coming through the kitchen window of a home that no one had helped me buy. I think about people who are where I was 2 years ago, giving and giving because it feels like love, because stopping feels like failure, because the family story requires a certain kind of sacrifice and they've been cast in that role for so long they've stopped questioning it. I want to tell them, the moment you start keeping honest records, not out of spite, but out of self-respect, something shifts. The fog lifts a little. You start to see what things actually cost, and whether you actually agreed to pay that price. You can love people and still require them to be honest with you. You can want good things for your family and still refuse to fund a version of events that erases you. Those 2 things are not in conflict. I spent a long time thinking they were. The condo closes a little earlier in my memory every time I think about it. In my head now, I'm already there, already home, already past all of it. That's probably not accurate, but it's where I want to live.